Morning. All right, so it's Wednesday. So we're gonna do the discussion activity today, which is a kind of fun programming activity that involves lots of loops. We'll be using our for loop a lot in here. So eventually, we'd like to be able to print off like 3 diamonds made up of these stars, and have the user pick how big these diamonds are for this, how big a diamond is for this. But we're going to build on that a little at a time through multiple steps there. And if you don't get all that way, see how far, because again, hopefully you'll get through step 4 here, sort of stuff. And then the rest are kind of bonus. But I don't know, this is a smart class. We'll see how this goes here. So, okay. So we're going to create a new program. So we're going to do a new project in NetBeans. So we're going to be printing off lots of stars and stuff like that. So give it some sort of name. It doesn't matter what you call it, really. And again, the first thing you want to do is print out 5 stars. Now, you might want to start with this. And then print out 5 stars, 5 asterisks, like that. But that is not going to necessarily help us be what we want, because what we next want to do is step 1.5. We want to ask the user how many stars to print out and print out that many stars. So we want to try to do this in a loop. You can actually jump right into step 1.5 if you want. Just ask the user how many stars they want to print out. How many stars? And then read that into some variable. So we're going to need So you're going to read in, ask the user how many stars they want, and read it into some variable. And then you want to have a loop and print out 1 star at a time, and then repeat that. So if they enter 5, we want to loop around this 5 times. So we want a for loop. This print statement. We're just going to print out 1 star at a time. See if you can figure out how to write a for loop to print this out. Remember, what is our for loop? So we say floor, and it's some initialization variable, some test condition, and then some increment there. And again, you might want to look back at your maybe you have some other samples from the last week or on Monday, where we are doing this for counter equals 1, counter is less than or equal to 3, counter plus plus. So maybe you're thinking something like that here. So how would you take something like that and put it in here? So we repeat this line. So whatever the user enters, we're going to loop that many times. How do we do that? See if you can figure that out. And then you can go on to step 2 and 3 and see how far you go. So here's my first attempt here. I did a for loop for count equals 0, count less than 5, count plus plus here. And I print line a star. And then so the program runs how many stars? I say 3, and that prints out 5 stars. I go, no, I only want 3 stars. So what if I say, how many stars? What if I say 10 stars? It still only prints out 5 stars. And it's printing them out on separate lines. So how do I change this for loop so that it doesn't always do 5 stars? Whatever max stars is, if max stars is 3 or 10 or whatever, does that many stars. So I want to not do this 5 stars, but I want to do it max stars number of times. And then also, how do I print this out so that each one isn't on its own line? How do I print it out so that they're all on one line? How do I do that? So see if you can figure it. If you've got that done here, then you'll be done with step 1, and you can go on to step 2 for that. So see if you can figure that out. How, so one of the keys is this 5. Right now it does it 5 times. I don't want to do it 5 times. I ask the user for it, and I store it on the variable. I want to use that in my loop. So see, make sure you can figure that out. So hopefully you're printing off a line of stars now and asking the user how many stars, and you're printing off that line there. So I'm printing off 1 star at a time, and I'm using print instead of print line, so it prints them all on one thing. One thing I noticed is that then it prints out my line of stars, but then it still has the program stuff build successfully. I want that on a separate line. So I want to add another print line here. The question is, where do I add a print line here? Do I add it down here, or do I add it right after this one? If I add it right after this one, it's still in the loop. And that's not what I want. That'll go back to this. If I say 6 stars, it'll put them all on separate lines. So I don't want to put this inside my loop. I'm going to put it right after my loop ends. So I have this little brace here where the loop ends here. So here's my loop. The loop starts there and ends here. That's my loop. And then right after the loop, I'm going to do my print line. So now if I do that, I can enter 6 or 7 stars. It'll print off the 7 stars, and then it'll go to a new line at the end of that. I like that look. So once you have that kind of done, our next task, so we've done this, modify your code so the user can enter the integer and the program will print that many stars. Okay, I've got that working. Now modify your code to print a box. Now this is a 5 by 5 box, so we want to use whatever the user entered here. So if the user enters 3, it prints off a 3 by 3 box. If the user enters 5, it prints out a 5 by 5 box here. So you wrote a for loop for the first thing. We want a second for loop that will repeat the first for loop. So this part prints out the line, and we want to do that like 5 times if they enter a 5, or repeat that again. So how do we repeat this again and again? See if you can figure out how to use a second for loop. So we're going to use 2 for loops here. So how do we, we've got this for loop working. How do we get another for loop that is going to do this 5 times, or whatever number of stars they entered? So see if you can figure that. That's getting challenging. So I think that, well, see if anyone can figure that out. So again, we want to print out this box of stars here with another for loop. And again, so we have one for loop here. What I want, and I want to do this inside another for loop. So I'm going to add another for loop here. Now I want to use a counter, and I don't want to use the same. It won't let me use the same counter. If you have two for loops, you should generally use different counters. And so this is going to print out each row. So I'm going to say use a counter like row. So I added a for loop here to print out each row, and I have this other for loop to print out a row here. But when I run this, it doesn't work. How many stars? So I say I want 5 stars. It prints out 5 stars, but it doesn't repeat that. I want it to do that 5 times here because I don't have anything in this loop. So what you have to do is you have to have a loop around a loop here. So what I want to do is what do I want to repeat? How do I print out each row? Well, this is the code for printing out each row. So I'm just going to cut that out of there and paste it up here. I'm going to do source format to kind of clear it up so it looks a little better. So now I have my for loop that'll go through each row. And then inside that, I have a for loop that counts each stars, and it'll print this out. So now if I run that, how many stars? I say 5 stars, and it should print off every time through this inner loop, it'll print off a row, and then it'll repeat that for 5 rows. Now, the one problem I have is that I run this, if I say I only want 3 stars, it'll print off 3 stars in each row, but it still prints it off 5 rows. So I need to change this so that it doesn't always do 5 rows. Whatever they entered, the max stars, it'll do that many stars in a line, and then also do that many rows. So I don't want to always do 5 stars, 5 rows. Now, one thing you can do is you can ask an AI. Here's ChatGPT, and this is the kind of prompt I would say. I would suggest you always start by saying I'm a beginning Java programmer, because otherwise it's going to give you more advanced solutions. And then I say, how do I change this code so it prints out a box of stars rather than one line of stars? And here's my initial code. And I just fed it my initial code. And it is a pretty good. To print out a box of stars rather than one line, you'll need to add another for loop. The second for loop will handle the number of rows, vertical lines of stars, while your existing row had horizontal lines. Here's an updated version of your code, and it has a for loop, and they actually called it rows. And then their inside for loop, they have columns. That's fine. And then they print off each star and do a print length. So this looks good, very much like what I have. One problem is that they ask how many stars wide and how many stars tall. And I want to always print off a square. So maybe I will ask him, can you modify this so it only asks for the number of stars and prints out a square of stars? So I don't want it to print off a rectangle where I have to enter how many wide and how many tall. I just want to have how many stars, and it'll print off that. So now it's redoing it with only a single input. And again, it's good to be able to compare this sort of output with what I have. How different is, I say print line how many stars. I set up my scanner, read in max stars. How many stars here? They have their scanner. And they say side length there, and I called it max stars. So I just have to remember that their version has a different variable name here. And then they're going through for row equals 0, row less than or equal to side length, row plus here. And again, Your program might be different. When you get more into programming, computer people like starting to count at zero. So I always start my for loops at zero. But you could just as well start at one, but then you're going to go less than or equals. So you might have these for loops starting at one, and that's perfectly fine, and less than or equal to max stars here. Maybe your increment is different. Maybe rather than saying row plus plus, you're saying row equals row plus one. That's fine too. Assuming you can spell row consistently. Here. So again, there's lots of little tweaks you can do where your code might not match an AI code or might not match my code, and that's fine. I don't need you to create code exactly like mine here. See how you do. So see if you can get it to print off a box scar. Mine still isn't quite working. And then once you do that, see if you can do this. See if you can print off 1 star the first time, 2 stars the second time, 3 stars, 4 stars, 5 stars. See if you can print off some sort of triangle here. Because eventually we want to print out a diamond, and that's one corner of a diamond. So we're trying to try that. So see if you can get that to work. So I'm not going to show you any more of the solutions because I want you, there's lots of different ways of solving this. I want to see some of your solutions, and then you're supposed to just post them to the discussion area. So this, again, prints off a square here. Now, one thing I will suggest is you might want to investigate what it's doing. So if I say 5 stars, it'll print off that. If I say 3 stars, should print off 3 by 3 stars there. Now, one thing you might want to consider is inside your inner loop when you're printing out, if while you're playing with things, try to print off maybe not the stars, but maybe print off the count just to see what the count is at every point. So if I say 5, the count goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the count counts over and over again. Now, we also have this row variable. What does that do? If I print off the row here, it'll print off all the ones for the first row, and in the second row it prints off 2, third row. So row is actually, as each row goes, the row variable changes from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, where the count goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, whatever. So that might help you if you think about that a little bit. That might help you figure out, what these things are, what might help to print out a triangle for that. So I'll let you try to figure out ways to print out a triangle then.